The morning of 9/11, I was actually at home. I was off duty. I was listening to Howard Stern on the radio, and I was stringing 2 fishing poles to go snapper fishing with my wife at the time.
It was a beautiful, beautiful, sunny, clear day. I was on my way to work, and just as I stepped onto the ferry, I heard a noise.
Stern started screaming on the radio that a plane had hit the World Trade Center.
There was a picture of the World Trade Center with a big hole in Tower 1. I knew it was Tower 1 right away because the antenna on top. And that's where my dad worked. The reporter at the time didn't know how it happened. They were speculating, was it a small plane? Was it an explosion? I called my mother and I said, hey Mom, have you heard from Dad this morning? And she just started crying and hung up on me.
When the second plane hit, people started to react, and there was a lot of screaming, a lot of crying, anger.
I called his cell repeatedly and just got his answer machine.
When I looked across about a half hour later, you could actually see the south building tilted to one side, halfway up, was starting to lean, and not 5 minutes later it collapsed.
I just started feeling really not knowing what to do with myself, and hoping that he hadn't gotten to work yet, hoping that he was on the train or that he had gotten out on the street and looked up, and because the communications were down, maybe I just couldn't get through. Had no idea what was happening. Shortly thereafter, the Pentagon got hit. That's when I started getting really panicked. And then I heard that there was another plane, and I was afraid that that whole day would just be dropping planes all over the place.
So it took me almost a day before they got me on a train going north, and that was late in the afternoon of the next day. And they put me on the last little roomette in the back of a sleeper car, and it took almost 24 hours to get up there. In that process, the word got around the train that there was a Red Cross worker. And I didn't realize, I guess it was the porters or somebody who let the word out, but I would get a knock on my door, and it was somebody asked me if I was going to be at the World Trade Center, and I said I didn't know, but I was on my way up there. And they would give me the name of a relative or a friend and said, please, please look for him. So I took the names and promised them I would do what I could do.
When they started collecting people who were injured when the tower fell, they were bringing them over to the Jersey City Marina where I was. We were hosing them down just to get the dust off them, get it out of their eyes, out of their pores and nose and mouth.
I didn't see body parts laying around. A lot of people said there was stuff like that laying around. I was all over that place. I never saw any. The only bodies I saw were the ones coming out of the hole.
There wasn't a sound. And I expected to hear, I don't know what I expected to hear, but I thought it would be very noisy out there, and it wasn't. And then it dawned on me they were listening to see if they could hear anybody buried under that rubble.
I had to go back about 2 weeks later to this downtown Manhattan. And the one thing that I'll never forget was the smell, the stench of just burning, whether it was food, people.
It was just all smoke and debris, and you had a tough time seeing. Your eyes would burn, and you had a tough time breathing.
I've lost people to cancer because of this. I've had one friend that almost lost his vocal cords, from ingesting the dust. He's had a couple operations to make sure he doesn't. One friend of mine lost half of one lung. I've already had 2 sinus surgeries. I get tested for cancer, on a regular basis. This is stuff that I'll live with, until I go.
most people in the entire metropolitan area knew someone who perished that day. I had a relative and 5 friends of mine that perished that day.
Our function there in the highway was to, excuse me, what we did was we escorted the bodies, civilians, the police, and the firemen, to the morgue.
A lot of firemen lived on Staten Island where I lived. And following month or 2 after September, they would have burial ceremonies for the firemen, and it was 2 and 3 a day for practically a month. And it was just, you knew that tomorrow you're going to have another funeral, and you're going to have a parade, you're going to have a procession, you're going to have services, and you're going to have burial services. And it went on day after day after day, and there was a constant reminder of what happened.
I lost two friends of mine. Jerome Dominguez, he was a highway cop and decided to become an emergency service cop. He felt he could better help people in the community that way. He died doing what he wanted to do, help. Another one was George Howard. He was an emergency service cop for the Port Authority. He was off that day also, and he ran into the towers to help, and he ended up, he perished.
My mom said, he's gone, he's not coming home. 10 days in. I want to have a funeral. I said, fine, whatever you want to do. Right after the memorial, I got my bag together, got back on the train, and went back to New York and kept hanging my missing posters. She said goodbye, I didn't. And I kept doing that every day for, over a months, going on 2 months after, every day.
I don't think my daughter understood because she was so young, but my son seemed to grasp the idea of it. And he ended up writing a paper in school about how it changed his dad. So he felt that I wasn't as happy as I used to be. I didn't joke around as much as I used to. So I mean, maybe in that, I guess through a kid's eye, I guess the truth comes out a little easier. I see things in a different way.
One of the things my dad told him about the World Trade Center, if you get to Avenue of the Americas or anywhere around that area and you're lost in New York, that's like the North Star. And it's gone.
The one thing that bothered me the most was the fact that I knew that from this day on, our life was going to change entirely from top to bottom. There was no way it was going to be the same.
Police officers and firemen, EMS, we get paid to run to run into burning buildings. If there are gunshots, cops get paid to run at that gunshot. EMS, they're in the mix too. And I'm not saying that we don't do a fantastic job, or we're brave. Whether you want to call it brave or stupidity, running at gunshots or running into a burning building that you might might not get out of, but that's our chosen profession. We do it for a reason, because we want to help people. The civilians that day that made it out of the building and ran back in to help their friends, those are the heroes. Those are the real heroes. The construction workers and welders that ran back to that place to start digging out, they didn't have to. They didn't have to sacrifice. They're the heroes.
To look at each other and be happy that they're neighbors, and look at neighbors and say, we're here together and let's try and work it out. And that was out of a catastrophe like that was one of the things that came out about it, that people helped each other.